Hello, my name is Jim Berk, and I'm so privileged to be speaking to you today as a second generation survivor, the son of an incredible woman who survived the horrors of the Holocaust. What you're about to hear is a remarkable story of a tough, smart, resilient woman who witnessed death all around her, yet wouldn't give up, wouldn't succumb to fear or despair, and did everything in her power to save her sisters and her mother, and succeeded. She also did her best to save others, helping keep their hopes alive amidst the Nazi terror. This is the story of my beautiful mother. Ilona, or Ilonka Dorenter, was born in Kežmarok, Czechoslovakia in August of 1918. She was the second of 7 kids, 6 girls and 1 boy. But at an early age, the family moved to Užhorod in Czechoslovakia. Ungvar was the Hungarian name. It was called the River City. Uj means river and Horod is city, and it's now part of the Ukraine. And these are pictures of what life was like back about 100 years ago, early part of the 20th century, and there's the river which bisected the city. This is my mother's grandfather, Mayor Grunstein, his wife, Nehe, and Aunt Zura. My great-grandfather was a successful businessman. He sold cigarettes and wine, and maybe that success and popularity created some anti-Semitism toward him because his life at one time was endangered. My great-grandfather traveled to Hungary, and he met with the emperor, Franz Joseph, whom he knew. Don't ask me how he knew him, but he knew the emperor. Emperor Joseph helped my great-grandfather, giving him some men for protection. He lived a long life, into his 90s, riding horses, I was told, at age 92. Mayor Grunstein had a daughter, Hani, and this is Hani. This is my mother's mother. Very beautiful woman, probably in her early 20s in this photograph. Now, Užhorod was a beautiful city with a population of about 20 to 25,000, and the river, as I said, bisected the town. My mom's family lived in a bank building next to one of these bridges. I don't know if it was the far side or the near side, but they were in one of these apartments next to the bank building, in a bank building, I should say. They had an apartment with a balcony. The river divided the old city and the new one. The Jewish community began here in the 16th century. It developed and expanded in the 18th and the 19th century. Now, my mom's father, Jacob, was a retailer of meat. He was a very religious man. He was president of the synagogue, very well known in the community. Jews totaled about 7,000, or about a third of the town's population. Now, the first language that my mother spoke was German, and it would significantly help her during her time during the Holocaust. She also did speak Hungarian with her mother. Now, these are some of the pictures of what life was like in Užhorod in the early 20th century. This was like the main drag where a lot of shops, businesses, restaurants, boutiques, whatever, are on this road. And here's one of the synagogues in town. As you can see, it was a beautiful building, wonderful architecture. Another couple of shots of that synagogue. Here's the big hotel in town. My mom and her older sister, Idush, went to dances at this hotel when they were growing up. Now, my mom was very good at mathematics and drawing at an early age, but sewing became her passion as a youngster. She was forced to work when her father, Jacob, died very young when my mom was a teenager, and I was named after my grandfather. My Hebrew name is Yaakov. After the Nazis ascended into power, Czechoslovakia was eventually annexed by Hungary in 1938. My mom was 20 years old at the time, and she would start to see signs of trouble.
Little by little. I had a salon, I had to take a gentle person in, you know, to be a partner. I couldn't have on my own, nothing. Then later on, you couldn't go here, you couldn't go there, in the evening you couldn't go out. on the market, because it wasn't stores like here. You go in the store, you can get everything. You have to get fresh butter and fresh fruit and fresh vegetables. And the market, you know, the people, the villagers came in to put up the market at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. The best things were early in the morning. But the Jews were not supposed. They could go out after 10, when they were open by 6, so everything was bought up by that time.
Every year became more difficult for the Jews. 1940 and 41 was still okay, according to my mother. 42 was worse. 43 was very bad. My mom's family might have been deported in the early 1940s, but she took matters into her own hands, traveling to Budapest in Hungary to get papers allowing her family to stay out of harm's way. Now, my mom tells the story of how she got all dressed up, put on her best clothes, her makeup, her lipstick, her perfume, and she made dates with all these men in charge of giving her these documents, okay? Those documents came very, very easily. My mom was a very, very pretty woman. Did she keep the dates? No way. She was out of town the next morning on the train, but she got what she wanted. Meanwhile, my mom's sewing profession was doing well, but again, a Nazi crackdown was imminent. She could have avoided any trouble getting out of the area, but my mom felt an obligation to her family.
I had tremendous connection, and I could have saved my skin. But I just couldn't do it. I couldn't leave behind my mother and my sisters. I wasn't brought up that way.
So in April 1944, during the holiday of Passover, all Jews of Usherod and surrounding areas, including my mom's family, some 25,000 people, were rounded up and sent to a newly created ghetto outside the city, which was once a brick factory and a lumber yard. My mom was not one of them, however. Somehow she avoided it. She tried to fake her own death. She threw her coat and some personal papers into this river. And her sisters initially thought that she had drowned. My mom hid overnight in a building. She didn't know what to do. She prayed that her deceased father, Jacob, would come to her in a dream and tell her what to do. But that dream never materialized. My mom eventually gave herself up. She entered the ghetto, much to the surprise of these guards outside. They were probably saying, who is this crazy woman wanting to come into the ghetto? But my mom felt an obligation to her family. She felt empowered to do whatever she could to help other people.
But I feel God knew what I did, and that's why I'm alive today. I have forgotten about my own sorrows because I was busy with others. Mama said one day to me in Auschwitz, I said, Mama, I have to take the coffee away from you. And Mama said, why, Ilona? I said, Mother, a woman is dying there, and she wants a little coffee. I have to give it to her. But I'm your own mother. I said, Mama, you will not die. God will help you. I have to give it. And I gave her that water, and she died. But I felt good about it, that I pleased her. That was her last wish.
My mom's family spent 3 to 4 weeks in the ghetto, and then in May of 1944, they were transported on a train to Auschwitz, spending 3 days and 3 nights on that train. Can you imagine? The only nourishment you would have would what you would have smuggled inside your clothes, and even then, most, if not all, would be starving in that horrible situation. Once they arrived into the concentration camps, they were forced into lines, and you can see the lines here. And there, in one of these lines, she came face to face with the infamous Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death, the man in charge of the selection process. To the right meant temporary safety and forced labor if you were strong and able to work. To the left meant instantly to the gas chamber and death if you were young or you were elderly, and then to the crematoria where they would burn your corpse. It wasn't good in the Nazi eyes if you had a physical or a mental disability. So my mom's sister Zisela broke her hip when she was a youngster, so she walked with a limp, which would be very dangerous as they were approaching the selection process. My mom herself had sprained her ankle just prior to this trip, and she was walking with a cane.
But when I came to Auschwitz, I stood out from the line and I looked, said right, left, right, left. Dr. Mengele is selecting people. And when I saw throwing out mothers and children and younger people and old people, throwing them out, I threw away the cane. I said, God, forgive me. I threw away the cane, and I said to Zisa, to my sister who is a fourth, Zisa, walk straight. It's bad. And when we walked, Dr. Mengele said, Arbeitsfähig. That means good for work. And then he took her neck out, and he says, Die links. She's lame, left. And I said, das ist meine Schwester, wo nimmt man sie? That's my sister, where are they taking them? And he said, they are taking them to a place where she don't have to work so hard. And I couldn't see.
Mass killings by the Nazis began as shootings. Einsatzgruppen, killing squads, started their work in 1941. Then it transformed into gassing, which took away some of the psychological trauma by the perpetrators. And in Auschwitz, with no working crematoria in mid-1942, the camp was engulfed by the sickening smell of rotten body parts spilling out of mass graves. So Nazi officials built 4 operational crematoria up and running in 1943, where they would burn the bodies. And you can see the chimney right there. 4,400 corpses could turn into ash in 24 hours. This is Zisela. Saranka was her Hungarian name. Look how beautiful. Sent to the left and murdered, age 22. This is Yidu, Yanur, his Hungarian name. My mom's brother, also murdered, 16 years old. My mom tells the story of that train ride into Auschwitz. She said Yidu was on his sister Zisela's lap, praying and crying the whole time, so fearful of what might happen. My mom said she wasn't crying. She was already trying to figure a way how to get out of the mess that she was in. So in this photograph taken by Nazi guards just after arrival on the Hungarian transport, May 1944, my mom is on the far right with the white head covering. You can see the arrow pointing to my mother. My mom's sisters are somewhere in this area, but they are obscured by the front row. These pictures were discovered after the war. They were made into a book. It's called the Auschwitz album. You could buy the book. We had an exhibit at the Holocaust Memorial Center in Detroit in 2010. I saw this photograph. My heart started beating really fast. I almost fainted. I mean, I saw it. I looked at my mom. I knew that was my mom, and I would later send the photograph to her, and she would verify that that was her. So that first night in the camp, my mom said was the worst night of her life. She got a cold shower, and she was shaved all over, just not just on her head. And here's a picture, again, of another photograph that I saw, my mom, the arrow pointing to my mom with a shaved head. She was painted with a red stripe on her back and given a uniform. My mom said it would not fit, it would be either too big or too small, given no underwear, no panties, no bras, just this rough cloth suit. My mom tells the story of knowing one woman in the camp who was gorgeous, with twin kids, both a year old. Both kids had been gassed to death and later burned. The mother didn't want to live. She wanted to touch the electrical wires surrounding the camp and die. She did not want to live. My mom said she was so busy keeping this woman safe, she tried to help others, and that made her forget about her own problems. Now, in Auschwitz, forced labor was intrinsic to the Nazi culture of persecution. Inmates worked in administrative, service, or clerical jobs and skilled trades and crafts. Outside, they worked in factories, mines, and on roads. And needless to say, no one received any kind of payment for any kind of work. Thousands upon thousands of men and women perished in these slave labor conditions from hunger, dehydration, exhaustion, and disease. Others were beaten or shot to death or had guard dogs attack them. Now, my aunts tell me the story that when they were forced to carry stones in the camp, if you weren't fast enough, they would sick the dogs on you. Fortunately, though, my aunts tell me they were never bitten. Now, in Auschwitz, my mom became useful in so many ways. She befriended a Blockelster, which was head of the block, and she became a Stubendienst, which is a maid in block number 26. She helped sew and clean instruments for a dentist in the camp named Urka. My mom was even forced to stand next to this Mengele, believe it or not, while he was making selections. My mom was picked out of everybody to stand next to him, giving him a towel for his forehead or a little water to drink. Can you imagine that? And eventually my mother's mother, Hani, arrived in Auschwitz. She was not on my mom's transport. Do you know how the family was reunited? My Aunt Rita, one of my mother's other sisters, found her own mother sitting on the toilet. Later, my mom saw her half-brother Peretz in the camp. This is Peretz, his wife Helen, and their two kids. Peretz had been separated from the family, and he asked my mom, how are Helen and the kids? My mom said, they're fine. They're with us. But my mom hid the truth. The truth was the wife and the kids had already been sent to the gas chamber. Later, my mom and her sisters would find out that Peretz died in Bergen, Belsen concentration camp.
These children, in one of the worst nights, went out, and I knew they are going to the crematorium. They were lying, they were kissing me, they were hugging me, and I knew they are going to the Christian. I can do this. That was the saddest day of my life, and I saw 800 children walking out in a rain. They went straight to the crematorium. They hardly could walk.
Now, my mom and her sisters not only had to deal with their own lives, but also trying to save their beloved mother, who was middle-aged and because of that, more likely to be selected for death. So one day in Auschwitz, Hani, this is my mother's mother, she fell off the top bunk bed in the barracks and she hit her head hard, causing a gash. My mom and her sisters were able to take care of the wound without any of the guards knowing it. And they were able to hide her in blankets during roll calls and avoid the unthinkable, saving her life. My mom said she once wiped some red paper on her mother's face to give her some color, thus making her look a little bit younger and a little bit more presentable. Organizing, which was gathering something valuable and bartering it for extra food or privileges, became a real way to survive in these camps. My mom said she would pick up cigarette butts and she would pick them off the ground and pool them together, okay, to make a cigarette to sell for some extra bread. She was always in business. Now, life was brutal in these camps. Beds consisted of wooden shelves, no mattresses, minimum straw bedding. Mom said it was always best to get the top bunk because if you were on a lower bunk, you would be subjected to diarrhea falling from above. Roll calls were at the beginning and end of each day. They would often last for hours, adding to the extreme fatigue and torment. Imagine you're in a starving situation and you got to stand in one of these lines for hours and hours. Camp uniforms with vertical gray and blue stripes were made of rough cloth, never washed or changed, with dirt and sweat infested with lice, inadequate to protect one from the harsh, cold weather. Now, my mom did so many things to help save the lives of others. I'll give you a couple examples. My mom at one time was in charge of spooning jam. It was in a food line where she would be in the jam, holding the jam, and she would take a spoon of jam and give it out to people walking by with a piece of bread. My mom would take her finger and scoop some extra jam from that spoon onto the bread for these people as they were walking by. Another time, she once took a potato from her own mother and gave it to a starving girl, and someone complained, "How can you take that from your own mother?" My mom said, "Because this other woman needed it more." Another time, a young girl was destined for death. Her family asked my mother for help as they were standing in line during one of these roll calls.
I said, Mama, you hold the line. I have to go into the block and take a rope. Take a
She meant a band, a
When you have
band.
that in your hand, you are doing this. And I said to the woman, when I came back, I said, you wait here and be close with your daughter. The daughter was out inside and she was outside. And don't cry and don't make any noise. I will do what I can do. So I got a Stubendienst band, and I said to her, tell your daughter that she should fall by my feet. And when she falls by my feet, I will put this on her left hand. And then she should raise herself up, and I will hold her hand, and one of my sisters will hold her hand, and she will become a Stubendienst. But she was a little shorter than me. I said to raise herself and be a Stubendienst. And that's what happened. So help me God that I'm telling you the truth. And she was there, and I saved her.
During her 5 to 6 month stay at Auschwitz, my mom recognized an old friend from years before whom she had a crush on. His name was Miller Bondi. Now, he was in a position of power in the camp. He was a capo, which was head of a unit. The Nazis gave certain prisoners more privileges, a little bit more food, a little bit more clothing to control the masses. They were still prisoners, but they did have to have a little bit of power in these camps. Now, my mom's head was shaven, as you can see in this picture, no hair. So my mom was a little bit embarrassed by her appearance, and she was worried that this Bondi, this friend from years before, would not recognize her.
So I bought a little pillowcase, a pink one and a blue one. Pillowcases you could buy from the people for a little bread. You give up the bread, and I made myself a dress with my sister's help, and a little kerchief. Then if I have a kerchief and a dress, maybe he will recognize me. And I says, Bundy, you have to help me. I am so-and-so, and I know you, and I met your mother and father, and the Dr. Shomodis was introduced. I says, and you have to help me. And he says, I can give you bring you a whole bread. No. You have to help me, because I have seen you with a Schreiberin. Maybe you're engaged, you're married. I wish you good luck. This was a nice little clean romance between us, and you don't owe me anything, but I want you to help me get out my family. And he promised me that he will talk to the Schreiberin right that day, and I was introduced to the Schreiberin, that's the secretary, and to the head, the larger eldest, the head of the head, and the two women knew me. And they said, when a good transport comes, that's the only way to get mother out, when a transport comes, and they know it's a transport, not to the crematorium, they will let me know.
And Bondi was able to do it. Get her onto a transport of about 3,000 out of that horrible camp. It most assuredly saved her life and the lives of her family. So my mom was in Auschwitz for about 5 to 6 months, Auschwitz located in Poland. At the end of October, beginning of November 1944, 8,000 women were evacuated from Auschwitz-Birkenau and transported to Bergen, Belsen, which was in Germany. My mom and her 3 sisters and her mother were among them, and so was Anne Frank, the young teenage author who would later become very famous because of her diary. So my mom and Anne Frank were in Bergen-Belsen at the same time. They didn't know each other. At least I don't think they did. My mom never mentioned it, and Anne was not famous, obviously, until after her death. My mom was 11 years older than Anne at the time.
So when we came Bergen-Belsen, it was heaven. The food was delicious. There was no zähler, no roll call. We didn't have to get up in the morning. We could talk, we could laugh. We even were cooking in our minds. Chicken paprikas and this and that. If we get out, we will get out. We will never take care of our figure. We will just eat and eat.
So my mom was lucky in Bergen-Belsen. She made herself very useful. She used her trade to stay alive. She actually made a suit for a Block Elster, and she also did the same in Auschwitz. So Life was a bit more bearable for Mom in this camp. My Aunt Ethel, my mom's sister, said, let's try to stay. But my mother's mother said no. Hani was a very wise woman, and she had noticed that every day the food given out was dwindling, becoming less and less. In fact, hunger and illness were rampant here. There was a complete lack of hygiene in this camp. Typhus, dysentery, and tuberculosis were prevalent. And as I said, my mother's older brother, Peretz, who would have been my uncle, died in Bergen, Belsen. So the stay in this camp was short, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Shortly before Christmas, 1944, my mom and her family were on another transport to Braunschweig, also in Germany. This was one of the subcamps of Ravensbrück. The camp dealt with steelwork, specifically making airplanes. My mom worked in a factory where she had to take an elevator down into salt mines underground. She was positioned on a big machine, and her job was to use a tweezer to pick up small ball bearings and place them in a hole.
It came to me. I never had glasses in my life. I am very good with my hand because I really, what I was doing, you know, needs fine. I could do it. It was nothing for me. I was doing it, and it was nothing. He says, you are the one. Now, every day you come to that machine and you start doing it. And I was very happy. The third day when I was there, or the fourth day when I was there, I got such terrible pain in my arm that I just missed it. And they had to stop the machine, and he bowled me out. And I told him, Herr Oberst, I said, something is wrong with my arm. And I had a tiny little thing, and he said he will bring me a black salve. I put on a black salve and passed him out, like, you know, if you've seen soda water when they squeeze, it came out pus.
Mom was infested with lice. You see, Braunschweig consisted of a large stable which was unsuitable for habitat during the winter months. The roof leaked, and rain and snow constantly fell into the stable. Can you imagine? No heat, horrible cold conditions. The women had to sleep on the floor, which was covered only with straw. The straw was infested with lice, so soon everybody was covered with bites, bugs and bites. My mom said she got the lice at Bergen-Belsen, but it became worse at Braunschweig. So worse that the doctors wanted to amputate her arm. They told my mom that within 10 days, the infection would hit her heart, killing her unless she got penicillin medication. The diagnosis was ominous. The future looked so bleak. And I'm sure there's no great supply of penicillin in these camps, right? Because why would you want to save a Jew when it would be so easy to kill one? My mom, I'm sure, was scared. It was her younger sister, Margaret, who provided the hope as the war was nearly over.
She put her hand over my mouth, and she said to me, Leitchu, the Russians are here, and the Americans are here, and the English are here. A few days and you will be free. Don't go. Don't let go. She started to scream. I should scream. Don't tell me anything. I don't want to hear it. You will live, she says. We will be free. And when she said that, I got such a power. Why should I die now when I'm so close to freedom? Why should I die now?
And it was at Bendorf, the 4th camp that my mom was transferred in February 1945, that she got the penicillin that saved her life. The 5th and final camp that my mom was transferred to was a subcamp of Neuengamme named Oxenhall. This was solely for female prisoners. These prisoners worked in armaments production, making guns and ammunition on metal processing machines. I'm not sure my mom did any of that because she was very, very weak at this point in her concentration camp experience. At the very worst part of that experience, my mom registered, believe it or not, 55 pounds, 25 kilograms, 55 pounds as a 25-year-old adult. But my mom was lucky, very lucky. And needless to say, were she not lucky, I would not be speaking to you today. So in the spring of 1945, as the war was winding down, Sweden was instrumental in helping save lives. Count Folke Bernadotte was part of the royal family. He is credited with negotiating the release of tens of thousands of prisoners from German concentration camps. The rescue was under the auspices of the Swedish Red Cross, and the mission used buses, white buses, painted all white with a Red Cross emblem on the side. Now, this was done so it would not be mistaken as a military target. Another hero who helped save Jewish lives was Hillel Storch. He was a key representative of the World Jewish Congress. His initiatives led to the liberation of thousands of concentration camp inmates and their subsequent transfer to Sweden. It was Bernadotte and Storch who helped save my mother's life and the lives of her three sisters and their mother, who would later become my grandmother. Now, en route to Sweden was a brief stop in Denmark. This is April 1945. And here again, I believe, I'm not positive, but I believe photographers captured another picture of my mother. Here in the first row, second from the right. Now, I have no definitive verifications of this, but knowing my mom's posture, her face, her stance, albeit kind of a grainy photograph there, I really believe that that is her. So after this, the Swedish Red Cross took her to Stockholm, and she was recuperating in the hospital. Hospital personnel went around to the beds, and they asked patients what they wanted.
So one woman said she would like chocolate, so they bought her chocolate. The other woman said she would like feet, so she would like this or that. They came to me. One woman said I would like cigarettes. You know, everybody had another. I came and I said, you know, I haven't seen the magazine for quite a while. I would like to know the fashion. I wanted to know the fashion. So Mrs. Nathanson said, you must be a very good designer if you want the fashion, because there's so much in life what you could have. But they wanted to give me. But I wanted to.
And if that doesn't show a devotion to her profession, I don't know what does. So around 1947 or 48, my mom wanted to thank Bernadotte in person for saving her life. So she went to the Royal Palace in Stockholm. My mom was turned away, not allowed in. They were probably thinking, who is this crazy woman coming up and knocking on the door? My mom came back another day, still not allowed entry. But true to form, exhibiting that never give up attitude, she tried again. And finally, on the third attempt, my mom was let into the Royal Palace. She got a meeting with the Count. She thanked him. He said, don't thank me, thank Hillel Storch. He talked me into getting that transport. My mom told the Count that she was a dress designer, and Count Bernadotte said, you can start right now. And by golly, she did. My mom started making dresses for the royal family. My mom was also introduced to Hillel Storch's. She was invited many times to their Friday night Sabbath meals. Now, on this third trip to the palace, when my mom finally got in, she met Princess Sibylla. Princess Sibylla had a little boy running around, maybe a couple of years old at the time. That boy's name was Carl Gustaf. Carl Gustaf is now the King of Sweden. So my mother knew the mother of the King of Sweden. How cool is that? From Sweden, my mom traveled to Paris and worked there for a while in dressmaking. My mom eventually came to America in the early 1950s, and here's a picture of all the sisters with my mother. My mom is the second from the right. On the far right is Idush. That's the oldest one. She avoided the Holocaust. She married a non-Jew and was able to stay in Czechoslovakia and totally avoid the Holocaust. My mom, second from the right, okay, and her three other sisters who all survived the Holocaust. Going from right to left, it's Aunt Margaret. In the white is Aunt Ethel, and on the far left is Aunt Rita. And I want to tell you a story about Aunt Ethel. My mother's mother, Hani, this was in Auschwitz. was taken to a holding cell, and the next stop, this was in the barracks in Auschwitz, the next stop would be the gas chamber for Hani. This is my mother's mother. My Aunt Ethel leaves her barracks to go out and rescue her mother. The guards outside refuse to let her into this barracks. Ethel, there in the white, threatens the guard, who eventually opens the door. Now picture this, a couple hundred people in the room crying and screaming very loud, a cacophony of yelling. Ethel cries out, "Mommy, mommy, can you hear me?" Hani, the mother, does, and eventually leads her out of that death trap, and that saved her life. Great story from Aunt Ethel. Aunt Margaret now, just in the middle, in between my mom and Ethel. Okay, all of the sisters were very, very good at sewing. My mom's was considered the best, okay, but all of them were very good. Aunt Margaret, next to my mom, in the middle there, when she came over to New York, she got a job with Oleg Cassini, the big designer in New York City. Oleg Cassini, as some of you might know, was the designer to Jackie Kennedy, the former First Lady, JFK's wife, okay? So listen to this. My Aunt Margaret worked on the dress that Jackie Kennedy wore to the Pope's funeral in 1963, standing right next to Jackie, fitting her with this black dress for the funeral. Pretty cool thing. My Aunt Margaret standing right next to Jackie Kennedy. So my mom was living and working in New York City, she wanted to go back to Sweden and to live there, but she decided to take one last trip. She said, you know what, I've never seen Miami Beach. Before I go back to Europe, I want to go down to Miami Beach. And lucky for me, she did. In December of 1952, she arrived in Florida in Miami Beach, but her hotel was overbooked. She was sent to another hotel, the Sovereign. It's still there today, right on Collins Avenue. Very close to the Fontainebleau. I'm sure some of you familiar with Miami Beach would know of that. And this happened to be my dad's hotel. Now, my dad, Sam, was a Grand Rapids native, Grand Rapids, Michigan. He was in the paint and wallpaper business with an opportunity to open up a new franchise in Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, my dad was vacationing in Miami Beach, staying at this hotel, the Sovereign. He was out on the beach in the wee hours of the morning when my mom arrived, again from her overbooked hotel. She wanted to take a look at the ocean. As fate would have it, there she met my dad, and I guess it was love at first sight, because 3 months later, they were married. And about a year and a half after that, I arrived into this world. Now, my mom continued to work and thrive in her fashion career. She was now living in Nebraska, okay? She would tirelessly sew and create new dresses, working in the sewing room, as we called it, which was just adjacent to my bedroom in Lincoln. My mom had a small clientele of very affluent customers, and at her peak, she would make and sell a dress and get $3,000 for it. Now, that's a lot of money today, but back in the 60s and 70s, that was a whole lot of money, a substantial payday. My mom even hosted a fashion show highlighting her exquisite dressmaking talent. And here's an invitation from the 1966 event, which was held at her house. I lost my beautiful mother in December of 2013 at the age of 95. I held her hand in the final moments of her life, and I thought about how those hands did so much in her remarkable time on earth, helping support her own family growing up, using those hands to help save lives in the camps, to cook and clean in our house, and maybe to dress me up on occasion. Who is that cute little kid there? And also to create masterpieces in fashion. In March 2016, I returned to Lincoln to speak at a reception's work. It was an exhibit showcasing a dozen or so of her dresses that I donated to the University of Nebraska after her death. As you can see, the colors and the fabrics that she created were so beautiful. I remember vividly that wherever she traveled, she would turn heads when wearing these outfits. How proud I was of her, and how proud I continue to be of her. And my dad, too. As you can see by these photographs, they made a great looking couple. Here's some more photographs from them in their later years, actually in Miami Beach, not far from where they met. And the top one there also from that same balcony overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. My mom continued to talk about her experiences to schools, to groups. She also lit candles on Yom HaShoah Day at the state capitol in Lincoln. It goes without saying that I am deeply blessed to be speaking to you today, telling my mom's incredible story. I hope by doing this, I can, in a small way, enlighten the world about the horrors of the past and to encourage everyone to believe that we can all make a difference in today's world so this never, ever happens again. Thank you so very, very much for listening.